Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. The Bloomberg Businessweek Daily podcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
The headlines that crossed, there's been a lot coming when it comes to the Fed as of late. White House officials are preparing for President Trump to nominate Council of Economic Advisors Chairman Stephen Miran to serve as a Fed governor. This is according to a person familiar with the search. You might recall that the president did say yesterday he would likely nominate a temporary governor to fill the seat rather than a successor in waiting for Fed Chair Jay Powell. That seat to be filled is from Fed Governor Adriana Kugler, who plans to leave that spot on Friday. All right, running into the studio because the Fed headlines continues, our own Michael McKee, who covers the Fed and international policy and the international economy. Are we surprised with this?
No.
Are we surprised about he being chosen?
Not necessarily. First of all, he's a top economic advisor to Donald Trump, so he's there in the mix.
Yeah.
And the president has said he wants a temporary replacement there. So it does make some sense because he's been recently confirmed. He was confirmed in March as CEA chair by the Senate. So he's got his paperwork in. There's not going to be anything he needs to add to it. And he's probably done all the financial divestitures he would need to do, that sort of thing.
The background check is done, basically?
The background check is done. They've looked at his TikTok and everything else.
He's good.
And so they could move fairly quickly. Now, the question is, what's the Senate calendar like? The Senate doesn't come back till September 2nd.
Okay.
The next Fed meeting is September 17th. There are 10 legislative days in there that they could move on this, and they need to get the paperwork in from the president. They need to go through the hearing process, which they could rocket through, but then they need to take it to the floor, and the Senate is going to be busy with a lot of other things, including the fact that there might be a government shutdown because there's no budget at this point. So it's a long shot maybe to get him in by September 17th. Mm-hmm. But the thing to keep in mind is the way Fed officials have been talking the last 48 hours, it may not matter because right now, given the economic data, they're sort of teeing up. You're saying
September 17th because that's the next FOMC
That's the next FOMC meeting. They're teeing up a rate cut then, I think, already. If the data continue the way it's going now with a relatively weak August payrolls report, and we get CPI, PPI next week, and then at the end of the month, the PCE. And if those show inflation rising a bit, but not too much, then you'd probably have a rate cut in train.
So we're talking about Miran here, and how much impact could really happen here given the fact that Kugler's term was set to expire at the end of January 2026?
Yeah, part of this is going to be how the president presents this. If Miran's going to be a long-term member of the Fed, then people will pay a lot more attention. If he's just holding a seat for 4 months and the president's going to appoint somebody else, then there's no reason to pay any attention to him because the Fed's going to be doing what the president wants anyway, probably. And so he's not going to add anything to the debate. But he has been a Fed critic. He thinks that they have been too slow. He is also, remember, the author of the Mar-a-Lago Accord idea that would see the U.S. try to weaken its dollar and get people to give up their treasuries, foreign countries to give up their treasuries.
Remember when we talked about we couldn't stop talking about it?
Yeah, so there's a lot there that the markets could focus on if they wanted to. And as I say, it would depend on how long he's going to be on the Fed, what kind of influence he would have. If the Fed's if he's done by January and the Fed's cutting rates, it's just done.
President Trump posting on social, "It is my great honor to announce that I've chosen Dr. Stephen Miran, current chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, to serve in the just vacated seat on the Federal Reserve Board until January 31st, 2026. In the meantime, we will continue to search for a permanent replacement. Stephen has a PhD in economics from Harvard University and served with distinction in my first administration. He has been with me from the beginning of my second term and his expertise in the world of economics is unparalleled. He will do an outstanding job. Congratulations, Stephen.
Well, there's your answer.
Well, there's your answer. Yeah, we don't have to make it speculation anymore. It's not an if. Now, the important thing to remember is you can't do a recess appointment to the Fed. So he does have to be confirmed. They will have to go through the process. He will have to resign as the CEA chair. And if he doesn't stay on at the Fed and they want him to go back, then he's got to be reconfirmed. So it's a bit of a pain in the butt for him
to go back to
the CEA, because the Federal Reserve Act requires that a member of the Fed board have no other job. So this isn't going to be like a Sean Duffy or a Marco Rubio thing where the president just gives him job after job because he hasn't got somebody else to fill them.
Mm-hmm. So we shouldn't make the assumption that he'll go back to that.
I would think not. I mean, I wouldn't want to take a job for 4 months, and my guess is that the pay level is about the same. But go through the Senate confirmation process for 4 months, if that, if you got 4 months, and then to have to go back and do it for the CEA again. See, if the president decides to nominate him for another 14-year term, they could put him through at both times at pretty much at the same time. Or he wouldn't have to really do much to get the second confirmation. They just do that in the background.
Mm-hmm. Does this bring a certain layer of certainty here? I'm looking at markets that are pairing just a touch here. But of course, we still have the idea of who's going to be Fed chair potentially.
Yes, but the story that we reported today, and again, this is Saleha Mohsen's scoops, that Chris Waller would be selected. It fits in the sense that you don't know whether Powell's going to leave the board. Now, choosing Waller might help Powell leave the board because he would feel better about the way the Fed was going to go afterwards. But he's already on the board, so you don't have to have an open seat. You can leave Miran in there, and then you can promote Waller, and it all just works together. So it does make sense.
Just real quickly, does this make Jackson Hole all a lot more interesting? Just quickly, which is coming up at the end of the month. Yeah,
it's going to make it more interesting, but it also may mean that Jay Powell doesn't want to say a whole lot.
Right.
Because there's all these balls in the air, but if the Fed's made it clear if everybody else speaking on the Fed makes it clear they're going to cut rates, then he doesn't have to prep the markets or anything.
You can't go home because the Fed headlines just keep coming.
No, I've moved under my desk. As Ariel said, like George Costanza on Seinfeld.
There's probably some blankets. I don't know, a Huggy, or what is it called? A fuzzy, a Snuggie. Yeah,
you're almost there.
There used to be there. I know, whatever they're called. All right, Mike McKee, thank you so much.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app, or watch us live on YouTube.
All right, semiconductors definitely on our watch again for a few reasons. First up, late yesterday, President Trump mentioned amping up tariffs on the space.
We'll be putting a tariff on of approximately 100% on chips and semiconductors. But if you're building in the United States of America, there's no charge, even though you're building and you're not producing yet in terms of the big numbers of jobs and all of the things that you're building. If you're building, there will be no charge.
All right, that, of course, was President Trump yesterday. And then this morning, the president called on the chief executive officer of Intel, Lip-Bu Tan, to resign because of what he called conflicts of interest, adding to the challenges for a company that is supposed to anchor restoration of the U.S. semiconductor industry. Here's what the president put out. He said the CEO of Intel is highly conflicted and must resign immediately. He was doing this, of course, on Truth Social earlier today. He went on to say there is no other solution to this problem. Thank you for your attention to this problem. Now, this comes after Republican Senator Tom Cotton asked the chairman of Intel's board this week to answer questions about Intel's CEO ties to China specifically, including investments in the country's semiconductor companies and others with connections to the country's military. As we mentioned, there's a fair amount of stuff going on. So let's get to it. A look at the Intel CEO. We wanted to talk to someone who has followed this company for a long time, knows the current challenges, and knows the executives certainly in the space. With us is Bloomberg News U.S. semiconductor and networking reporter Ian King. He's out there in our San Francisco studio. First of all, Ian, thank you so much. You know this company so well. You know what they're facing. You understand the executives who are there. I mean, Intel, we know, is a critical piece of Washington's efforts to rebuild the domestic semiconductor industry. I want to start with you first of all, and we ask you this a lot. I mean, Intel, even with its struggles, is still a very important company, certainly to the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want this country to be domestically capable of producing technology that leads this industry, the vehicle has to be Intel. There's no other company that's even close. Yes, they are not what they were. Yes, they have stumbled, but they're still the best if you believe in the necessity of advanced semiconductor manufacturing in this country.
So how are you perceiving this new added pressure here? I mean, has the CEO had enough time here to really turn around and really show a turnaround story here?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you have to do is look at what has changed. I think that you've gone to the heart of the matter there. He's only been in the job 4 months. 2 years ago, the House Committee on China asked him questions about his history of investments in China. So none of this kind of association with China is new. That's just not new at all. What is new is that Intel recently, during earnings, cast doubts on whether it'll build the plants in Ohio that everybody's looking at as a cornerstone of chip manufacturing in the US, that it'll be very measured in its introduction of new chip technology. That has obviously created an undermining of this story of bringing back chip manufacturing to the US and sort of making the US great again in that particular area. So clearly that has caught the attention of politicians, and clearly they're not happy with the direction that that's going in. And obviously we're now seeing some kind of a backlash, and that's focusing on the CEO of Intel.
Well, and I think it's kind of interesting, Ian, that this comes one day after we saw Apple CEO Tim Cook in the Oval Office with the president talking about investments in the U.S. and seemingly, at least some were weighing in on this and saying this is a way of getting some of the heat off of Apple, right? Is this potentially about the Intel CEO kind of not kissing the ring here?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Jensen Huang from NVIDIA, we've seen Lisa Su from AMD, and pretty much all of the chip CEOs at some point making an appearance in the White House or at various events where the president or senior administration officials have been. So that's clearly been a policy that has, blossomed, shall we say, in the chip industry. We have not seen Lip-Bu Tan make any appearances at any of these type of events. But to be fair to him, he's only just got the job, and he's apparently taking 20-odd meetings a day trying to figure out what the heck is wrong with Intel and how to fix it. So you pick your poison here in terms of what he should be doing.
Right. And as investors, you probably want him focusing on doing what he needs to do at the company. The stock, though, we should point out, is down about 3.7% today and down just shy of 2% year to date here. If the president, though, is coming at you hard, Ian, what does that do to your turnaround efforts? Does it kind of spread you a little bit?
I mean, that's what we need to know. We haven't seen a response to this latest message from the president from Intel yet. We've been trying hard to get one, and we haven't seen one appear anywhere else. So you have to believe that that means that they are thinking very carefully and in a very measured way about how they respond to this. We've seen conjecture, well, is this the end for Lip-Bu Tan? What does this mean for Intel's turnaround? All out there, and clearly more uncertainty is not what Intel needs right now. We need signs that they're moving forward, and this clearly does not help.
So earlier on, we actually had Republican Senator Tom Cotton adding pressure, saying the chairman of Intel's board earlier this week, he was asking questions about Tan's ties to China. And of course, we know that the U.S. is really focused on those national security concerns. Of course, Intel did say that they are committed to national security. But can you just speak to what some of those barriers are and what some of those headwinds, essentially, what are the flags that a lot of this industry is dealing with as it pertains to national security here?
Yeah, I mean, semiconductors have become the absolute central tool that the US is using in its increasing geopolitical rivalry with China. Semiconductors are considered, because they are absolutely essential to technology that you would use to develop either economic strength or military strength. And that has only increased in focus with the emergence of AI as a viable tool for any number of different uses, including military. So depriving China of advanced semiconductors or the ability to develop them themselves has become a number one priority, or very close to the top priority in, for this administration, for the previous one. So anything that talks to that is a very much a political hot potato, and will come acutely into focus and be used by politicians depending upon what it is they want to achieve.
Yeah, and a hot potato and sometimes conflicting signals is what some might say in terms of protecting this industry here in the U.S. and also putting some pressure. Ian, thank you so much. Busy day for you, and so glad we could get some time with him. Ian King, he's Bloomberg News U.S. semiconductor and networking reporter.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
All right, well, this week, GM, General Motors, signed a deal with Texas-based Novian Magnetics to secure rare earth magnets for its full-size pickup trucks and SUVs. So this is the third domestic supply contract the automaker has signed related to the critical trade dominated by China. You might recall last month, Apple struck a $500 million deal to buy rare earth minerals from MP Materials. That's the U.S. producer that secured backing from the Pentagon. That company, by the way, reporting after the close. We're talking about rare earths a lot, and with good reason, especially considering the world's dependence on China for rare earth permanent magnets. And we know that this has been certainly part of the trade conflict between the U.S. and China. So let's get to it. A great roundtable with us. Back with us is Dr. Gracelyn Bascarin. She's director of the Critical Mineral Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She's out there in our D.C. News Bureau. Also here in studio is Bloomberg News economic statecraft reporter Joe Doe, who understands and is constantly explaining the space to us here at Bloomberg. He's right here in our studio, joining Nora and myself. Hello, everybody. Dr. Bascarin, great to have you here again. Remind the world just why this is so important, who really has them, what the U.S. wants, and is the U.S. making the right moves to expand their presence when it comes to rare earths?
Thanks, Carol. It's great to be back. So the first and foremost is in April this year, China rolled out restrictions on heavy rare earths. And what this did is it put a chokehold on the industry because all of a sudden we had a supply chain disruption. And the automotive industry was particularly hard hit. Within 8 weeks, we saw that Ford actually had to pause production of its Explorer model owing to these supply shortages. What the U.S. did in response was a full-out effort to warp speed access to these rare earths and these magnets. Most recently, we saw the Department of Defense make a $400 million investment in MP Materials, essentially putting the U.S. government as the biggest shareholder to accelerate production, both of the rare earths and the permanent magnets.
Yeah, we've talked about that, which was kind of got all of us like, wait a minute, is this now a state-owned entity? Joe, come on in on this.
Yeah, I mean, this investment that we've talked about now for a few weeks, right, was a signal to the market. I think that was kind of the main thing. It was a signal to the market from the Trump administration, from the Defense Department, that the United States was serious about a mine-to-magnet supply chain. They were also signaling the real concern that the United States has over the fact that China has put in these export controls, as Gracelyn points out. We'd seen rare earths as export controls starting back in 2023. The difference maker here was the magnets. And that's why companies like GM came out and publicly said, the magnets are a problem, we're short, and we're having to stop production. So we now have a situation where MP Materials has been given a $400 million investment, equity investment by the DoD, loan financing to become a magnet producer. This is a miner.
So problem solved?
And problem.
I'm just being silly.
Right, exactly. Problem. Right. And actually, that sarcasm is very much the conversation I have heard constantly now for the past few weeks in the market, which is in anything in manufacturing is hard because just because you say you're going to build a plant doesn't mean the plant will just come together and work straight out of the gates. And I think there are questions among many in the market of this mining company. Can they figure out how to produce so many magnets at scale
right.
in the time needed.
So listen, you brought us Graceland. You ask her something.
So my question is, I mean, Graceland, you're sitting here now weeks later after this announcement. What do you think?
We're giving all the right signals in from both the supply and the demand side intervention. You know, a lot of what this MP materials deal with Department of Defense was it was supply side. It was saying we need more rare earths and we need permanent magnets. What this new big announcement from General Motors is really telling us is they're also giving the demand signal by agreeing to offtake. Joe, we've talked about this before, but one of the difficulties is the price environment. Prices are generally pretty low. By stimulating demand and showing that there is an off-taker, what we're really saying is that we are meeting a market need, and that's a really positive signal. General Motors as a whole has had first mover advantage on a number of deals related to this. We saw them with the MP Materials deal. Now we see it with the Noveon deal for the magnet. So really it's showing that it is a full mine-to-magnet effort if we want to reduce our reliance on China.
Do you think, now that we're showing there's commercial market for this, commercial demand, as you're saying, are we now in a show me moment? Prove it that you can actually deliver these magnets?
Absolutely. We've already seen that Noveon Magnet is already making their first magnets, and they were delivered last month, which is a really great first step. Now what we need to make sure that they can do, along with some of these other magnet efforts like MP Materials' second production facility, is to make sure that we can ramp up at a level that is quick enough, because we know that whatever trade agreement is reached with China is still transitory and time-bound, and we could have future disruption. So we now need to make sure that we can ramp up fast enough.
Can we? In your view? As Joe said, none of this is easy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is enough market pressure to do it. You know, I was always reminded that during the COVID-19 pandemic, we developed a vaccine for a virus that we didn't know existed in less than a year. America's strong suit is innovation when under pressure. And I think what we've seen from the amount of government support, but also the way that we have embraced that challenge from a private sector point of view, that we are well on our way to being able to do that.
I mean, China controls over 60% of the global rare earth mining and more than 85% of processing capacity. And of course, we know that the U.S. really sees rare earth independence as essentially a security concern. How does the U.S. fit into all this? I know you mentioned that you do think that we have a stake in the game, but let me know to what degree.
So I want to take you back to actually 2007 and 2008 quickly, when our auto industry started collapsing and we saw significant bailouts to the automotive industry, given the impact on jobs and investment in a really important sector to the U.S. economy. We have skin in the game to ensure that our automotive supply chain does not have disruptions, because we know what the economic consequences, not just in the Midwest, but to the entire country that relies on it. So when we think about it through the lens of the economic health of our country, as well as importantly national security, given that magnets are used in a variety of defense technologies, we have every incentive to get this right.
Graceland, what's your biggest concern, though, moving forward? I know you're optimistic, but what do you think is going to be the biggest hurdle actually making this happen?
Can we do it fast enough? I mean, a lot of these things are very, very small scale. You know, in MP Materials' first year, they're actually only going to make 1% of the amount of permanent magnets China made back in 2018. So the ramp up will take time. And given the risk to further disruptions, the big question is, can we do it fast enough? And that's really difficult to to be able to say that now.
We're talking with Graceland Baskeren, Director of the Critical Mineral Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies out there in our Washington News Bureau. Our own Joe Doe is also with us, with Nora and myself. Hey, one of the things, Graceland, I wanted to ask you is, how important, though, is this market for China and their economy? And if the U.S. is backing off, who does China then start talking with to do deals? And are we starting to see signs of that?
China's economy is already struggling. We saw this past year, they had the highest levels of deflation in modern Chinese history. Economic growth has really slowed. The IMF has actually flagged a number of these trade risks as a really big economic risk that China is facing. Anytime you have a new players coming on, because remember, it's not just the United States. We have countries like Saudi Arabia, Australia, and Malaysia are also going to bring facilities online in the next couple of years. This is a significant risk to China's future, because they've relied on supplying the entire global economy until this far.
So could we have a glut in a few years? I mean, I know they're called rare earth, and we've already debunked that. But could we have a glut, essentially, in a few years? Or impossible?
That's a real risk we have. The reason a lot of mineral prices are actually quite low, like lithium is down 85% in 3 years, nickel is down about 80% in 3 years, is because there's oversupply on the market. Oversupply is a real risk, and one that the market hasn't really conditioned itself to understanding if we get to a point where we have far more than we need and prices get pushed down further.
Talk to me about what this means for a lot of those technology companies when we think about rare earth materials. How does this impact something like the likes of Apple, for instance, and iPhones?
So, I mean, technology firms need rare earths across the board, and that's part of why Apple signed this deal. And increasingly, companies are willing to pay a premium to not be reliant on China because they saw that manufacturing could come to a grinding halt in the instance that China wants to roll out these restrictions. So generally for tech firms, they'd rather have too many options to buy from rather than not enough.
Graceland, I think one of the questions I have is, when you're looking out 2 years, 3 years from now, where's the investor class on this space? Do you feel like, yeah, great, we're seeing some offtake agreements, there's real commercial interest, but at some point the rubber's going to meet the road, and the question will be, where are the investors going to sit?
The investors are really going to be a couple of different sources. So given that rare earths and permanent magnets are used in virtually every sector of the economy, a lot of these investments are going to be made by off-takers. So we have seen already General Motors, really probably, and Apple being really signs of what is to come going forward. We expect to kind of see these deals being cut across the economy, particularly with President Trump's recent announcements, for example, on semiconductor tariffs, right? Which is really an effort to incentivize sourcing here in America. So when you kind of add up the aggregation of efforts ranging from tariffs to supply side intervention to stockpiling, which was part of the new Budget Act, it's really a full throttled effort to ensure that we are sourcing from America for American companies.
Hey, last question, Graceland, before we wrap. We do have MP Materials reporting after the closing bell. As I mentioned, stock's up almost 350% year to date. It's up another 4.3% in today's session. What are you watching out for? And just got about 30 seconds.
I'm looking to see how fast MP Materials can deliver. The amount of support MP Materials has gotten is absolutely unprecedented, and now they have the significant task of being able to scale up quick enough to meet both our national security and economic security goals. So I want to know how fast they're going to deliver on the very high expectations that the U.S. government has placed before them, as well as industry in this country.
Okay, whenever I talk with you, I always want to just take a class on rare earths, but you have to be the professor. I'm just going to put it out there. Dr. Graceland Bascarin, thank you so much. Director of the Critical Minerals Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And same thing, I'll take a class with you anytime, Joe Doe. He is Bloomberg News economic statecraft reporter, a must-read here at Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Well, the Kremlin said President Vladimir Putin and President Donald Trump are finalizing details for a meeting within the next few days, even as the White House insisted that the Russian leader still needed to agree to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, from the Oval Office late yesterday, President Trump commented on a possible meeting with the Russian leader.
We had some very good talks with President Putin today, and there's a very good chance that we could be ending the end of that road. That road was long and continues to be long, but there's a good chance that there will be a meeting very soon.
How close do you think you are to a deal?
Excuse me?
How close do you think you are to some kind of deal?
Well, I don't want to say. I've been disappointed before.
All right, that, of course, was President Trump yesterday from the Oval Office. Back to help us understand what may be going on behind the scenes, especially when it comes to President Putin, is Dr. Angela Stent. Delighted to have her back with us. She's senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, the author of Putin's World, Russia Against the West and With the Rest, former National Intelligence Officer for Russia and Eurasia at the National Intelligence Council, and she served in the Office of Policy Planning at the U.S. Department of State. She joins us on this Thursday from Nantucket. Dr. Stent, nice to have you here with Nora and myself. The president said that we could be ending the round. He said it could be an end to that road Do you agree that we are close to an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine?
I do not agree with that. I think it'll be good if the two leaders meet, but we know that Putin really doesn't have any intention of agreeing to a ceasefire or really stopping the war until he's sure that he gets all the concessions from Ukraine that he wants. And unless something occurred in this discussion between Mr. Witkoff and Putin that we don't know about, or we don't know the content yet, I don't think that Putin's going to get that yet. So this will be the first step, hopefully, towards something that could result in ending the war. But that will be a very long time ahead.
Can you put into context for us just how complicated and exhaustive ceasefire negotiations can get?
Well, first of all, the U.S. side with the Europeans and the Ukrainians would like to have a ceasefire agreed upon first, and then get into the details of what a resolution or a negotiated settlement to this war would be like. Putin has insisted that the ceasefire will only come when, quote unquote, the root causes of this conflict are addressed. And the root causes for Russia are that it wants to subordinate Ukraine, and it wants to have guarantees that NATO won't expand anymore, and that its borders will be secure from its definition. So I think a ceasefire itself is complicated to negotiate because you have to figure out who's going to monitor it. At what line do you then say the ceasefire is? Because the Russians are insisting that the Ukrainians recognize the incorporation of 4 territories into Russia, none of which Russia fully controls. The Ukrainians control part of that territory. So that in itself would be very complicated. But I think the more serious question is whether the Russians will be willing to talk about a ceasefire before they get the kind of guarantees they're asking from the United States about Ukraine's future.
Angela, when I traditionally think about a summit, I usually assume that negotiations and discussions have already happened before your meeting. It's more or less a formality purpose. Are we working backwards here?
Yeah, I think this is a very different situation. I mean, normally, as you say, U.S.-Russian summits, a lot goes into the planning. Most of the stuff's agreed upon before the leaders meet, the communiques and everything. Clearly, there have been some negotiations going on behind the scenes. We're not informed about them. But this would seem to be a very quick timetable for a summit. And therefore, even though I think President Trump said it might be very soon, I'm not sure how soon it will be. And the Russians now say that it's the U.S. side that wants the summit. The U.S. side said it's the Russians that asked for the summit. So this in itself would be quite unusual unless, again, something was agreed upon between Mr. Witkoff and President Putin that we don't know about.
Do you have a clear tell on the relationship between President Trump and President Putin right now? Because increasingly, and most recently, we have seen the White House, the president specifically, seem to be putting more pressure on Russia and being tougher with Russia and President Putin. But what's your read on that relationship which up to now, we've seen President Trump, I should say, talk often in his first term and certainly his second term about how much he admired the Russian president?
Yes. I mean, I think until recently, he more or less only had praise for President Putin. Mm-hmm. He said that they had these great phone calls. And it's only recently that he said, well, actually, the phone calls were great. But then immediately afterwards, the Russians would intensify their bombing on civilian targets and infrastructure in Ukraine. So I think President Trump is, on the one hand, I think, increasingly impatient with President Putin and realizing that the Russian leader says one thing and then doesn't do anything about it. On the other hand, he's clearly not willing to go full out and condemn Russia and put much more pressure on it. He hasn't imposed sanctions, more sanctions on Russia, although he could still do that tomorrow. And he still hasn't agreed that the U.S. will supply Ukraine with any of the weapons that it needs to push back against Russia, although he has said that our European allies in fact, are purchasing and will purchase weapons from the U.S. that they will then give Ukraine. So I think you have to listen to what he says, but then you also have to see what he does. And clearly, Putin wants this meeting with him to preempt President Trump from doing anything else that would put more pressure on Russia.
I mean, it sounds to me like this is going to be difficult. If the U.S. is saying the Ukrainian President Zelensky needs to be there, that's not likely. It sounds like Russia is not going to give in and give any territories back. I mean, it sounds like this will never happen.
It sounds, this is a delaying tactic on Putin's part.
Okay.
You're quite right. He has no intention of meeting with President Zelensky. He doesn't consider President Zelensky his equal. He wants to meet with President Trump. And none of the European leaders are going to be present at this meeting either, even though President Trump did have a phone call with them after the Witkoff meeting, and he is, I think, keeping them informed. So I would be very surprised if anything emerges from this meeting other than, they had a conversation and there are going to be future conversations, and this process is going to continue.
Do we need to be worried at all about President Putin's health here? There's been some reports out there. I'm looking at Google, but we've had some talk in the newsroom. We have a viewer asking about that. I don't know. Do we have a clear read on that as well?
We don't. There were rumors a number of years ago, even before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and then afterwards, that he was sick, that there was speculation about what different diseases he had. There is still speculation about that. We don't have too much concrete information about it. And he appears to be quite vigorous. He goes to meetings, he shows up. So I would say that we don't have a clear reading of this.
What's the nature of the United States support for Ukraine at this stage? If you think back to the previous administration, there were a lot of discussions about how much we were giving in terms of financial support to Ukraine.
So at the moment, there is still money actually left over from the Biden administration that hasn't been fully dispersed to Ukraine, but there have been no new commitments under the Trump administration. There are, I think, a majority of senators, including many Republicans, who would like to support Ukraine more. But of course, the MAGA base is very much against that. And that is why President Trump has said, we're not going to supply any more money or weapons for free. If the Ukrainians want to buy the weapons, they can. And this is why the Europeans are doing this. So there is not much support and there's no new support going to Ukraine from the United States.
Angela, just quickly, 25 seconds. Are sanctions the toughest tool the U.S. can use on Russia and President Putin to get him to the table?
No, I think the sanctions are important, but the toughest tool would be to supply Ukraine with all of the weapons it needs to really push back against the Russians. The Russians aren't making very much progress in Ukraine. They're taking little bits of territory every week. They're losing still thousands of people.
All right. Always fun and always informative when we check in with you. Dr. Angela Stent, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution, author of Putin's World.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.